Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry Saravia at the movies. This will be the last major plot point I will discuss about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull for good and ever. I will not discuss this movie anymore. I am sick and tired of trying to defend it. I've written about it, I did a whole analysis on it. The reason I bring this up is because on the IMDb board for Crystal Skull, there are people on there who are still a little bit confused about why on earth is Indiana Jones referred to as Henry Jones Jr. in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Okay, so fine, you have issues with the plot, with implausible action scenes, this and that and the other. And you know, for another day, I wouldn't mind mentioning some of the things that were just as unbelievable in the first 3 films as they were in the 4th film. This is a movie series, you're not really supposed to be taken seriously. But anyway, on occasion I visit the IMDb board for shits and giggles, and this is being brought up time and again. Why is he being called Henry Jones Jr.? Okay, so let's just make this perfectly clear to some of you who may not understand this. In Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, of course, he's referred to as Indiana Jones, Dr. Indiana Jones, what have you. He's never referred to as Henry Jones Jr., simply because the first 2 movies never established that Indiana Jones had a father, period, let alone a mother. In fact, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, he only makes reference to his mother. He says, my mother used to tell me all sorts of tales about hocus pocus, blah blah blah. That's the only time in the first 2 movies that he made any reference whatsoever to having parents, period. He's either called Indy or Indiana Jones. This is really a trivial subject, but hey, let's get through it and I'll never have to mention it again. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he is still called Indy or Dr. Jones, but his father, played by Sean Connery, calls him Jr. His father's name is Dr. Henry Jones Sr., Professor of Medieval Literature. So, they're both in fields related to, and well, actually his father's just interested in medieval literature and the Holy Grail. His son, obviously, you know, Indiana Jones is an archaeologist. Now, he consistently refers to him as Junior. Now, at the tail end of the movie of The Last Crusade, and if you haven't seen the movie, too bad, I'm going to reveal it anyway. When his father grabs his hand and holds him over the chasm, and Indiana Jones is trying to reach the Holy Grail, says, I can get it, I can get it. All through the movie, his father referred to him as Junior, period. Finally, he says, in order to get his son to see that, hey, you know, it's time to let this go, he calls him Indiana. After that, during the scene where they're on horseback, ready to take off, his father says to him, once again, he says, and what did you learn, Junior? And he says, Junior, Dad, and blah blah blah. Then we realize where the name Indiana came from. It came from the name of his dog, which of course I think is the case with George Lucas's dog, if I'm not mistaken. His dog was named Indiana, which is where he got the whole idea in the first place. Now, afterwards, they have a little discussion about the origin of Indiana Jones's name. Then, the father says, after you, Junior. And he looks at him, he smiles, and they take off. Yes, sir, he says. So, we've established that it is okay for his father, after all, to call him Junior. Hence, his name is Henry Walton Jones, Jr., which is why, 20 years after the events of Last Crusade, in the character's time frame, we have to assume that he wants people to call him Henry Jones Jr. Period. That's it. So, the Danforth, who works at the university where Indiana teaches, calls him Henry. John Hurt's character calls him Henry Jones Jr. Mac calls him Jonesy. So the thing is that only Marion really calls him Indiana, because that's how she knows him, as Indiana. And then there's General Ross, who you see in the opening scenes, who someone reminded me that did call him Indy. I know this is all stupid and speculative, but the idea is that out of respect for his father's memory, the character decides he wants to be called Henry. That's all there is to it. Those who are closest to him will call him Indy or Indiana, but he prefers to preserve the name out of respect for his father, who had passed on, as they established in Crystal Skull. That's all this is. And everything his father had once said comes through the character, which is why he's a little wiser, even though not necessarily smarter about certain things, Indiana Jones, but that's for another time. Or it hasn't been. I've already talked about that before. But that's the idea. That's why he's referred to by those names. Indiana, even at one point, says this is intolerable, which is something that his father had said a couple of times in Last Crusade. So it's just preserving the memory of his father. That's it. It's his name. That's all it is. So get over it, people. That's all I'm going to say about Crystal Skull forever. I have nothing more to say about this movie. I am done. It's a silly, petty criticism. And this is Jerry Saravia at the movies, signing off.